This video presents a complete walkthrough of every Python string method available. Every time you clean up user input, format a message, or search inside text, you are using string methods. By the end of this video, you will know what each one does and when to use it. A string is a sequence of characters. Python gives you built-in methods to work with strings. A method is a function that belongs to a string. It lets you search, modify, and check string values without writing the logic yourself. The upper method converts every character in a string to uppercase. It does not change the original string. It returns a new string with all letters capitalized. Numbers and symbols in the string are not affected. Here we store the word Python in a variable called name. Calling the upper method on name returns the string Python in all capital letters. The lower method converts every character in a string to lowercase. It returns a new string with all letters in small case. The original string stays unchanged. Numbers and symbols are not affected. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. Calling the lower method returns hello world with every letter converted to lowercase. The capitalized method returns a copy of the string with only the very first character converted to uppercase. All remaining characters are converted to lowercase. It does not affect numbers or symbols. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. Calling the capitalized method returns hello world with only the first letter uppercased and the rest in lowercase. The title method converts the first letter of every word in a string to uppercase. All other letters in each word are converted to lowercase. It returns a new string and does not change the original. Here we store the string Python is fun in a variable called text. Calling the title method returns Python is fun with the first letter of each word capitalized. The istitle method checks whether a string is in title case. It returns true if every word starts with an uppercase letter and all other letters are lowercase. It returns false otherwise. Here we check two strings using the istitle method. The first string is already in title case, so it returns true. The second string is not, so it returns false. The swapcase method reverses the case of every letter in a string. Uppercase letters become lowercase and lowercase letters become uppercase. It returns a new string and leaves the original unchanged. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. Calling the swapcase method returns hello world with every uppercase letter flipped to lowercase and every lowercase letter flipped to uppercase. The strip method removes leading and trailing whitespace from a string. Whitespace includes spaces, tabs, and new line characters. It returns a new string and does not change the original. Here we store a string with extra spaces on both sides in a variable called text. Calling the strip method returns the same text with all surrounding whitespace removed. The lstrip method removes whitespace from the left side of a string only. The rstrip method removes whitespace from the right side only. Both return a new string without changing the original. Here we store a string with spaces on both sides. Calling lstrip removes only the leading spaces. Calling rstrip removes only the trailing spaces. The other side stays unchanged in each case. The removeprefix method removes a specific prefix from the start of a string. The removesuffix method removes a specific suffix from the end. Both were added in Python 3.9 and return the original string unchanged if the prefix or suffix is not found. Here we store a URL string in a variable called URL. Calling removeprefix with HTTPS removes that prefix from the start. Calling removesuffix with .com removes that suffix from the end. Each method only removes the exact text you pass in. The find method searches a string for a substring and returns the index of the first match. An index is the position of a character, starting at 0. If the substring is not found, it returns -1. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. We call find with the argument world. It returns 6 because the letter W is at position 6. The index method also searches a string for a substring and returns the position of the first match. The difference is that index raises a value error if the substring is not found. Find returns -1. Here we call index on the string hello world with the argument world. It returns 6, the same as find. When the substring exists, both methods behave identically. The find method returns -1 when the substring is not found. The index method raises a value error instead. Use find when a missing match is acceptable. Use index when a missing match should stop the program. The count method counts how many times a substring appears in a string. It returns a whole number. If the substring appears 0 times, count returns 0. It does not raise an error for missing substrings. Here we store the string banana in a variable called word. We call count with the argument a. It returns 3 because the letter I appears 3 times in banana. The startswith method checks whether a string begins with a specific substring. It returns true if the string starts with that value and false if it does not. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. Calling startswith with hello returns true. Calling startswith with world returns false because world is not at the start. The endswith method checks whether a string ends with a specific substring. It returns true if the string ends with that value and false if it does not. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. Calling endswith with world returns true. Calling endswith with hello returns false because hello is not at the end. The in keyword checks whether a substring exists inside a string. It returns true if the substring is found and false if it is not. It is simpler than find or index when you only need to know if something is present, not where it is. The replace method searches a string for a substring and replaces every occurrence with a new value. It returns a new string. The original string stays unchanged. Here we store the string hello world in a variable called text. We call replace with world and Python. Every occurrence of world is replaced with Python. The split method splits a string into a list of smaller strings. By default, it splits on whitespace. It returns a list. The original string stays unchanged. Here we store the string hello world Python in a variable called text. Calling split with no arguments splits on spaces and returns a list with 3 items, hello, world, and Python. The rsplit method works like split but starts from the right side of the string. This matters when you pass a maximum split count. Here we store the string a comma b comma c comma d in a variable called text. Calling rsplit with a comma separator and a maximum split count of 1 returns 2 parts. The split happens at the last comma, keeping the beginning joined together. The string a comma b comma c comma d splits differently depending on which method you use. Calling split with a maximum count of 1 breaks after the first comma, giving 2 parts starting from the beginning. Calling rsplit with the same count breaks before the last comma, giving 2 parts starting from the end. The splitlines method splits a string at line breaks and returns a list of lines. It recognizes new line characters and other line boundary characters automatically. The original string stays completely unchanged after the call. Here we store 3 lines separated by new line characters in a variable called text. Calling the splitlines method returns a list with 3 items, 1 for each line, with the new line characters removed. The partition method splits a string into exactly 3 parts using a separator. It returns a tuple containing the part before the separator itself, and the part after. If the separator is not found, The original string becomes the first part, and the other two parts stay empty. Here we store the string name equals Python in a variable called text. Calling partition with the equal sign as the separator returns a tuple with three parts: name, the equal sign, and Python. The rpartition method works like partition but searches from the end of the string. It splits a string into exactly three parts using the last occurrence of the separator. It returns a tuple with the part before, the separator, and the part after. Here we store the string with multiple slash in a variable called text. Calling rpartition with a / as the separator splits at the last slash. The join method combines a list of strings into a single string. It places a separator between each item. The method is called on the separator string, not on the list. Here we store three words in a list called words. Calling the join method on a single space, with the list as the argument, combines the words into one string separated by spaces. The result is Hello World Python. The isDigit method checks whether every character in a string is a digit. It returns true if all characters are digits and the string is not empty. Otherwise, it returns false. Here we check two strings using the isDigit method. The first string contains only digit characters, so calling isDigit returns true. The second string contains a letter mixed in, so it returns false instead. The isDecimal method checks whether every character in a string is a decimal digit. It returns true only for standard decimal digits. It returns false for superscript numbers, fractions, or any non-decimal digit characters. Here we check two strings using the isDecimal method. The first string contains standard digits, so it returns true. The second string contains a fraction character, so it returns false. The isNumeric method checks whether every character in a string represents a number. It accepts standard digits, fractions, and superscript numbers. It returns true for all of these and false otherwise. Here we check the same two strings using the isNumeric method. Both return true this time. The fraction character counts as numeric, even though it is not a standard decimal digit. These three methods overlap but are not identical. Standard digits pass all three checks. Fraction and superscript characters pass only isNumeric. IsDecimal is the strictest, and isNumeric is the most permissive of the three. The isAlpha method checks whether every character in a string is a letter. It returns true if all characters are alphabetic and the string is not empty. Numbers, spaces, and symbols all cause it to return false. Here we check two strings using the isAlpha method. The first string contains only letters, so it returns true. The second string contains numbers mixed with letters, so it returns false. The isAlma method checks whether every character in a string is a letter or a number. It returns true if all characters are alphanumeric and the string is not empty. Spaces and symbols cause it to return false. Here we check two strings using the isAlma method. The first string contains only letters and numbers, so it returns true. The second string contains a space, so it returns false. The isSpace method checks whether every character in a string is whitespace. Whitespace includes spaces, tabs, and newline characters. It returns true only if all characters are whitespace and the string is not empty. Here we check two strings using the isSpace method. The first string contains only spaces, so it returns true. The second string contains a letter along with spaces, so it returns false. The isUpper method checks whether all letters in a string are uppercase. The isLower method checks whether all letters are lowercase. Both ignore characters that are not letters and return false for an empty string. The isIdentifier method checks whether a string would be a valid variable name in Python. It returns true if the string follows naming rules for identifiers. It returns false if the string starts with a number or contains invalid characters. Here we check two strings using the isIdentifier method. The first string starts with a letter, so it returns true. The second string starts with a number, so it returns false. The length function works on strings just like it works on other data types. It counts the number of characters in a string, including spaces. It does not count separately for uppercase or lowercase letters. The zfill method adds zeros to the beginning of a string until it reaches a specified length. It is often used to format numbers with consistent digit counts. If the string is already long enough, zfill returns it unchanged. Here we store the string 42 in a variable called a. Calling zfill with a length of 5 adds 3 zeros to the beginning of the string. The final result becomes 00042, padded to 5 digits total. The center method centers a string within a specified width by adding padding on both sides. The default padding character is a space. If the total padding is uneven, one side receives one more character than the other. Here we store the string high in a variable called text. Calling center with a width of 11 adds padding on both sides. The result is a string of length 11, with high centered and one side receiving one extra space. The ljust method pads a string with extra characters until it reaches a specified width, keeping the original text at the start. The rjust method does the same, but keeps the original text at the end. Both default to using a space as padding. Here we store the string high in a variable called text. Calling ljust with a width of 6 keeps high at the start and pads after it. Calling rjust with the same width keeps high at the end and pads before it. The format method inserts values into a string using placeholders written as curly braces. Each pair of curly braces marks where a value should appear. Values are passed as arguments to the format method in order. Here we store the string Python in a variable called name. The template string contains curly braces as a placeholder. Calling the format method with name inserts Python into that spot, producing hello Python with an exclamation mark at the end. fstrings and the format method both insert values into a string. fstrings write the variable name directly inside curly braces, with an f placed before the opening quote. The format method keeps the placeholders empty and passes values separately. The encode method converts a string into bytes using a specified character encoding. The default encoding is UTF-8. Encoding is often needed when saving text to a file or sending it over a network. Here we store the string cafe with an accent in a variable called text. Calling the encode method converts it into bytes. The result shows the accented character represented as multiple bytes in the UTF-8 encoding. The makeTrans method builds a translation table that maps characters to replacements. The translate method applies that table to a string. Together they replace many characters at once, faster than repeated calls to replace. Here we build a translation table mapping A, B, and C to X, Y, and Z. Calling the translate method on the string ABC applies that table. Every matching character is replaced, producing XYZ, XYZ. Multiple string methods can be called one after another in a single line. Each method runs on the result of the one before it. This is called chaining, and it avoids creating extra variables for every step. Here we chain 3 methods together. Strip removes the surrounding spaces. Lower converts everything to lowercase. Replace world for Python. All 3 run in one line, producing hello Python. This table summarizes the case conversion and whitespace methods covered so far in this course. Use it as a quick reference whenever you forget exactly how one of these methods behaves. This table summarizes the search and find methods covered so far in this course. Each one checks or locates content inside a string in a slightly different and useful way. This table summarizes the methods that modify, split, or join strings, all covered earlier in this course. Each one transforms a string into a brand new value without changing the original. This table summarizes the validation methods that check what a string contains, covered earlier in this course. Each one returns true or false depending on the characters inside the string. This table summarizes the formatting and advanced methods covered earlier in this course, including padding, encoding, and translation. Together they round out the full set of string methods in Python.